after that, we would talk at NWA shows until he made the move to come back home, and we stayed in contact. And then once he came back up here, he opened up, he kind of started rebooting Control Your Narrative, opened up Exodus Pro. We were doing training up here, and that was kind of how all of that started. I trained with him all summer, and actually it was his show that we were just working this weekend. So I spent, he gave me a really great birthday present this past weekend, which he's great. Yeah. So it's been a really good experience.
That's amazing. I love hearing that about him. I've heard nothing but good things about him as well. And so I asked about the training from him because I want to try to kind of, what did you kind of take from not only Tom, but EC3 as well? Because obviously I imagine they have very different training styles, and obviously, the way, or Tom was in the business when it was still like very guarded when it came to kayfabe and what didn't happen behind the curtain, and you would never get a straight answer out of anybody about anything, and they were a little more grizzled. And then obviously he had to, he trained so many people through the 90s and through today, and then EC3 came up around the time where kayfabe for the most part has all been long gone dead, and it's not a secret as to what everybody's doing, and he's more on the social media era when it comes to actually working and everything. So kind of what is the differences that you've seen, and then what do you feel you learned the most from both of them?
That's a great question. The biggest differences, I would say, kind of like you had already mentioned, Dr. Tom really coaches, still to this day, more of an old school dynamic. We were taught to hit the ropes in an old school way. We're taught to do different grabs, moves, the way that, would be considered old school today. Whereas, they have found different, faster ways to get into some things. But it's cool because you do learn how to do both. And he always says, Dr. Tom will always say, try it my way. If you don't like it, you can go back to that fancy way. It's like he says. Or go back to, that other way. So it's cool because you do learn how to work both ways. But it was funny because when I did start training with EC3, they hated the way I hit the ropes and were trying to get me to undo it, because the thing I heard was, nobody does it that way anymore. Nobody does it that way anymore. But it's like, well, if you go to Knoxville, Tennessee, they're still doing it that way. So it was just funny seeing, the difference. But I did learn, the core basics from Dr. Tom, which I'm really glad I did learn in that old school style, because it kind of teaches you how to learn to work with everybody. No matter if I'm working with someone who is maybe, let's say they're a luchador and they work from the other direction, or someone bigger than me, or a guy, or you know what I mean? So it's just it teaches you how to work with everybody, these quote unquote developmental core principles. Now, compared to when I come up here and I'm working with EC3, where the conditioning was, we did some great conditioning with Dr. Tom. Don't get me wrong, that 5-5-5 drill will end your entire week. But we just did more, I think, we were doing heavier conditioning with EC3. I flung a guy over my back and ran up a hill, is a good example. It was some Mulan type stuff, where they're running up the hill carrying those buckets of water. That was except it was a guy, and I'm doing that, up there pulling my weight with them as well. So we did have some harder conditioning, and the biggest thing he believes in is that my wrestlers will not blow up. He takes a lot of pride in having us heavy conditioned where we can get through these 10, 15-minute matches without dying at the end. And he also does a great job of breaking things down and teaching you how to actually work. and I don't want to say too much because, kayfabe, but
Exactly.
they do a really good job of really kind of breaking things down, teaching you more realistic looking ways to sell, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I get that. So, I mean, you mentioned you were in radio and you still are. How did you get in the radio? Because I imagine when it came to the working and, like you said, having to know how to do promos, you were more comfortable talking, obviously not in front of people, but obviously to a point to where lots of people are listening to you. Was we'll get in my first question about how you got in the radio in a second, but how was your experience in radio helped you when it came to the promos?
Oh my goodness, exponentially. It helped me so much because, like you said, I am used to talking in front of people. Even though in the studio you're on a microphone, we would still do live events all the time. I did a lot of MC jobs where I would just work the crowd. You're learning how to, like, let's say, for example, I'm hired to host a 5K. We're working the crowd before the race takes off. You got to work them when they get back. You're kind of learning how to keep people engaged. The people who are sitting there waiting for the racers to get back, keep them engaged while something else is happening. So, that experience alone is great because now, when we're wrestling, first of all, the coach, everyone who's running the promoters and stuff feel very comfortable giving me microphones, which is a huge compliment. It's gotten me ring announcing jobs. I remember the one night I was at a show and I was booked to wrestle, but there was something going on, like weather-wise, where the person I was going against didn't show up, the ring announcer didn't show up, and so like the promoter comes up to me and he's like, "You work in radio, right?" I'm like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Think you could ring announce?" And I was like, "I'd never done it before, but let's give it a shot." And really, you just get your note cards. And I went out there, and he was like, "You would have thought you've been doing this for years." And it's like kind of like, well, you follow the same formula. Even though I've never specifically ring announced, I've done a lot of other stuff. So that really has been a huge advantage because I am able to be versatile with things like that. You can give me a microphone and I can confidently cut a promo in the ring and not be nervous or worried or anything. And I do know how to work off of crowd cues, based off of what I'm saying to kind of get the reaction that I want. And that even, transitions to working promos on camera, being a little bit more creative with it. I'm already aware of the crutches that people who, some people cut promos and, 3 different people cut a promo, but it all kind of sounds the same because they're all kind of cutting these standard basic promos where people are falling onto these crutches that are just kind of, used to get you through it, or I'm not going to be like nervously rocking in it or, like it's helped me be more relaxed. Think of different things to do that is, be able to be more creative with it. And really the trick to it all is that I just have fun. I have so much fun when I have a microphone in my hand. I feel natural, like that's my environment. Like I'm not nervous or stressing or trying to think of what to do or what to say. Like a lot of it just comes off the top of my head and I just roll with it, and I think radio helps with that because in radio, yeah, we have an idea of what we're going to talk about, but a lot of that you just have to, you're pulling it off the top of your head,
No, that makes sense too because like you said, it's not all scripted. I mean, obviously, when you've got kind of bullet points when you are a radio person because you want to hit this, and obviously, I imagine being on or hitting your cue in radio has really helped you when it came to doing promos as well because for televised TV, you've got to really hit that time, and if you don't, then either you're in trouble or somebody else is in trouble. And so I imagine that's helped you quite a bit as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, is I really do have like this internal clock that when I'm talking, I can kind of start to feel like, okay, like they don't even have to tell me. I'm like, all right, I'm kind of getting an idea that like I'm about around a minute right now, just based off of how long I've been talking and what I've been saying. You know, like I do have those cues that go off. Yeah, like that internal clock.
Well, so let's go back. How did you get into radio?
So that just goes back to after I aged out of competitive cheerleading, I was trying to find a way to stay on stages and in front of people, and make it a job, make money out of it, you know, where it wasn't just doing it for a hobby. Because I did sing as well, but it wasn't anything that was able to, quote unquote, realistically be turned into a job, you know, where it was kind of told a lot of that stuff too. So it was more me trying to find a way to make a career, make money out of this gift of entertaining that I love. I have, like, that's, you know, kind of my thing. That's what I do. I'm an entertainer. I love being in front of people. I love making them happy, entertained, mad, sad, whatever emotion I'm trying to pull out of them. Like, that's, you know, what I go for. So I went to broadcasting school, and it came very easily to me and very quickly. I got an internship with one of the biggest radio stations in Cleveland, and it just went from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had done an internship for a radio station down here in the DFW area. Unfortunately, at the end of it, the guy I was working or interning for had gotten a syndication deal, and he was waiting for the radio station to sign off on it, but they were dragging their feet. Then we found out later, whenever they flipped formats, that's why they were dragging their feet, which kind of sucked for everybody involved. But, I mean, it ended up working out well for him somewhere down the line. But it's funny to look back, like how fickle the radio business is, and like how, you know, you can flip formats on a dime, and then looking back, like they get rid of certain people that really would have helped down the line. Because the guy I was working with was very big in the MMA world. He even had a podcast with Frank Mir for a while, and this was like right around 2008, whenever UFC was just starting to get, like, you know, monstrous the way it was. But nobody, you know, was looking at it as like an actual, like, bigger than boxing level thing. They were just like, oh, okay, those are just guys in cages doing, you know, cockfights for the most part. So we're not gonna focus on that. We're, you know, all the regular sports, that's what we'll focus on, and that's it. And I was just like, you know, looking back, it's just so dumb how much they could have kept that guy on, and it would have been so much better.
Yeah, that tends to happen in radio, I've noticed too,
Yeah.
but
That's almost any industry, really. They don't, the forward thinking is not so much. It's like what's happening now and let's focus on that.
yeah, but it is kind of funny thinking about it, how even throughout radio, I feel like, you know, going back to talking about what you're destined for and things like that, you know, people are like, oh, that sounds cheesy, but even throughout my career in radio, there were times that wrestling was getting pulled into it, and like, I, you know, at the time was completely clueless, but for example, like, so I was interning at what is now iHeart. At the time it was Clear Channel, and Hulk Hogan was in town. This was 2013, and he came through and was promoting TNA. This was after he had just taken it over, and the Big Show was coming to town. And he came into the studio, and that entire day, you know, it was my job, because I was the intern, to kind of escort him around and make sure he stayed on time, was where he needed to be in each of the different studios, because there's like 9 radio stations in this one building, to make sure that he's where he needs to be. And I even got a chance to talk to him and do like a mini interview myself, and we took some pictures, and his hand was bigger than my entire head, which was hilarious. But then, like, even after that, you know, we would get tickets through the station, go to the shows. So it's just funny how, like, one of the first big celebrities I ever got to interview was Hulk Hogan.
That's huge. it's like wrestling. I mean, you can argue really at this point that if it weren't for him and Vince, pro wrestling would not be where it is today. And